Hello, welcome. I hope you're doing well. It is now March, so it's finally time to do my first wrap-up. It's my wrap-up for January and February, so up until this point in the year, everything that I've read. I have had such a strong start to my reading year because I've read a total of 10 books so far, which last year I read a total of, in the entire year, 25 books. So the fact that I'm almost halfway to that number and we're only in March, a little wild, just a little crazy. I'm pacing to read quite a bit this year so far. That's one thing. And then the second thing is that I've enjoyed every single thing I've read. I've liked everything that I've read so far. I've either liked it or loved it. I've read a lot more than I had at this point last year, and I've enjoyed everything that I've read. So a very strong start to this reading year for me. I'm very, very happy with it, and I'm hoping that this is the way the rest of my year is gonna go. I mean, we'll find out. But as it's looking right now, it's looking really, really bright, which is amazing because I've missed being able to read this much. Anyway, 10 books to get through. I'm just going to kind of walk you through all 10 of them and just kind of give you my general opinions, thoughts on what I read and how I felt about the book. So let's just get straight to the books. So the first 3 books that I read for a reading vlog, and the idea was to read 3 books from 3 different authors that were originally in 3 different languages, from just 3 different continents, really. Just spread it out as much as possible. And so I have a lot more thoughts and things to say about these books that I'm not gonna repeat here. So if you are interested in what I had to say about these books, then I'll link the video to my reading vlog for you to go and check out. Alright, so the first book that I read this year was Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is originally a Japanese novel. This had been on my TBR not too long, but I was really, really curious about it. And it's like a collection of 4 short stories that are kind of more like 4 parts to a larger story, which I really enjoyed. There are recurring characters, and so you really get to know the characters. I really, really liked that. I thought that was really nice. I went into this expecting a lot of emotional stories. The first one isn't very emotional, so it surprised me and kind of like knocked me a little off kilter, but the rest are quite emotional. And there's a full circle moment, and it was a very satisfying read. I found this very satisfying. I really enjoyed my time with it, and I do want to get into the rest of the series. I thought the characters were great. I liked the setting. The Japanese writing style is a little bit different to what I'm used to, but I enjoy it. I think it's really nice. Yeah, I don't really have all that many complaints when it comes to this. The next book that I read for this vlog then in 2024, it's probably the heaviest book that I've read so far this year. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. This is originally Russian, and as the title suggests, it follows Ivan Denisovich through one single day of his life. He is a prisoner in a work camp in the Gulag. I don't know all that much about this part of Soviet history, and so this was kind of like an introduction to that, and it was intense, to say the least. It was quite intense. This is the kind of book that just makes you think and reflect, and it evokes a lot of emotion from the reader. An intense read. I want to read more from Solzhenitsyn, but I have the feeling that his books are the kind of books that you need to take. You don't binge them. You read one and then you take a break and then you read something else and you take another break, because this alone, which is a very short story, was quite intense. Definitely understand why it's a modern classic and why it's, why Solzhenitsyn is so highly praised as an author for so many reasons. So glad I read it. Will be reading more. Need a little break. And then the third book that I read this year, and the third book for that video that I made, is The Devil and Miss Prym by Paulo Coelho. This is my first Paulo Coelho book, and it will not be my last. This book was amazing. It is very philosophical, and I felt as a reader I had a very interesting reading experience with it, because it really felt like I, as the reader, was kind of watching an experiment take place. It's not like this isn't the kind of book, I think, where you get very attached to characters and you're there for the characters. You're more there for the story as a whole, and you want to see how things play out, and you want to see what people do and how they react and what they think and feel. It's very much the kind of, you're the outsider looking in-ish, is how I felt anyway. And I haven't read a lot of books that made me feel that way. So this was a very kind of fresh story and storytelling method for me, and I really enjoyed it. And it's another book that made me think and reflect, and it was very interesting. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good book, and I cannot wait to read more. I have The Alchemist high on my TBR. We'll be getting to it this year, guaranteed. And I'm really, really excited for it. So again, these 3 books, if you want to hear more about my thoughts on these books in particular, then I have a reading blog for it. I go into a lot more depth on my thoughts and opinions on the books there. Just don't want to repeat myself too much. So if you are interested in hearing more about these 3 books, then you can go and check that out. The next book that I finished this year was Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. This is a mystery, thrillery story of vengeance, but it's also so much more than that. And that's my favorite thing about it, because the balance between the kind of brutal and angrier and that kind of frustrated elements of the story that kind of come with this kind of vengeance story are balanced so well with incredibly emotional and poignant aspects. And it's such a smooth blend of brutality and anger, but also grief and attempted redemption, and just it's a very, very moving story. It touches on so many things, and I think it does it really, really well. The only thing I will say is this was a lot more brutal than I expected it to be, a lot more graphic than I thought it would be, and I don't love very graphic violence. I don't love reading that or seeing it, for that matter. There's one scene in particular, it's like 4 pages of a fight scene, and I just kind of skimmed it because I didn't need the graphic details, which there were plenty. I got the idea. I didn't need to read 5 pages of it. So yeah, I didn't love the very graphic, violent elements of it. I really didn't think that the story needed it. But aside from that, I really loved everything else. It was a moving story, a touching story that also managed to be incredibly brutal and hard and rough. And it was just, I just can't praise the balance that this author managed to strike between those elements well enough, because it was done so well. And yeah, I thought it was really good. I will be checking out more of this author's books because I think he's incredibly talented. And I already had my eye on a couple of his books, and now I'm just even more eager to get to them. This next book that I read, it was almost like very unceremonious, because I kind of picked this up on a whim and kind of read it all in the same day, and that was kind of it. And I just kind of swallowed it up. It was, as it says on the cover, in one of the blurbs, masterful. I totally agree. And that's Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These. This book has been more or less everywhere for several months, and I knew nothing about it or this author until it suddenly started popping up on people's favorites lists for 2023. This book or the other books that she's written. And then when I picked it up myself and realized how short it was, I just kind of sat down and read it in one go. I didn't know what to expect, but I was very impressed. I really enjoyed the storyline. I really enjoyed the writing. I thought it was very neat. I read one of the blurbs said something like, she doesn't use a single word more than necessary, and I agree with that. I think she is very effective in her language use in more ways than one. Not only does she keep her story short and to the point, but it's also, she manages to somehow also make it quite beautifully told. Just goes to show you really don't need 400 pages to tell a good story. I knew nothing about these laundries at all until I read this, and so I had to research once I finished it. I still really enjoyed it, and I got the idea. I realized what was happening, what was going on, and I think my favorite thing about this is the way the story ends. I thought it was just a very, how do I go about saying this without like spoiling anything? The entire time the story felt very realistic. It felt like it could have been picked out of history, and the ending kind of just flows with that as well. It's not a kind of superhero story. If you've read the story, maybe you know what I mean. But it felt very much, it was a believable story. Like I said, this could have been picked out of history and it wouldn't have surprised me at all. I also just really liked the way that she chose to tell the story. The main character that she chose for us to follow, being on the outside and kind of being more or less as familiar or unfamiliar about what's going on as the reader is, and just kind of going about their day. They're more or less, they're more or less happy, satisfied with life, they're doing well enough. And then you have, underneath the entire story, the brewing knowledge of what's going on just over the hill. And it was told so well and very effectively, and I just really loved her writing. I am already itching to read more of her stuff. Bottom line, I'm just very impressed by Claire Keegan and her ability to tell such a story in just over 100 pages. On the back of the book, there are a bunch of little blurbs, and I just think they're all, for once, I agree with all of them. I think they're all really, really good. These ones in particular. A snow globe of a story that fits a whole bustling, striving, yearning world into 114 finely wrought pages. Absolutely. This one too, truly great, quietly radical. And then also a restrained and intensely moral book full of hope and love. I just think that she's a fantastic writer, and I cannot wait to read more of her stuff. I think that this book and this author seems to thoroughly deserve the hype that she and her work is getting. I'm glad that this was brought to my attention. I'm glad I've read it. Yeah, just a very, very good book. Next, I read 3 more books for a vlog. So again, if you want to hear more in-depth thoughts and opinions on these particular books, then go and check that one out, because I'm not going to repeat everything that I said there here as well. I read 3 books by Jo Nesbø, and the whole point of making that a vlog was the fact that one of my resolutions this year is to read more Scandinavian books in Scandinavian languages. Jo Nesbø is Norwegian, these books are Norwegian, and I decided to make that resolution a kind of series here on YouTube, just to help motivate myself and kind of remind myself to make sure I go out of my way to read something in Norwegian, something in Swedish, maybe also something in Danish. The first is Sjalusimannen og andre fortellinger. The English title would be Sjalusimannen and Other Stories. This particular collection, the stories in here are all centered around really strong human emotions and the, as it says on the back, potentially deadly outcome of them. Things like jealousy and lust and unfaithfulness and things in that kind of direction. Jo Nesbø is a crime writer, and so there will be, crime in more or less everything he writes, and this did not let me down. I thought this was an excellent way to get a first impression of Jo Nesbø and his writing. There are 7 short stories in this book. I really, really enjoyed them. I thought they were all really good. My favorite stories were London, Sjalusimannen, and Odd. Again, they're short stories. They're not groundbreaking stories. Some are more original than others. Some of them were quite predictable. Others did have some really nice twists and turns. In general, I thought this was a pretty good collection of short stories, and I enjoyed them. Then I read the 3rd book in Jo Nesbø's Harry series. These are police thrillers. You can read them as standalones if you want to. You don't have to read them in order, I've discovered for myself, but this was also the recommended place for me to start, because the first 2 books in the series are not on par with the rest of the series. This particular book has an historical element as well. You follow 2 timelines. The now, which would be, this came out in 2000, so it was around 1999-2000, and then also the 1940s, and eventually we see how they kind of tie together, and obviously at the center of the story there's a criminal and a crime, and Harry, our main character, our policeman who we follow in the entire series, we follow him trying to solve the crime. And I really, really loved this book. This is my favorite book that I've read so far this year. It was a solid 5-star from me. I thought it was amazing. I really, really enjoyed this book, and it makes me extra happy that this is a Norwegian book, because it gives me kind of even more motivation to get to more Scandinavian books, because there are some really great ones out there. So yeah, thoroughly enjoyed this book. The storyline was amazing. I loved Harry as a character, which is very rare for me to love our main kind of detective character in any sort of crime novel. Very rare, but I really, really enjoyed him as a character, and I enjoyed the story. I thought it was interesting, intriguing, compelling, It pulled you in. I loved all the details. I love how basically everything that's told in the story is important to the solution. I don't know, I thought this was an excellent book. And then the last Jo Nesbø book that I read was The Snowman, which is his most well-known work. This was made into a movie with Michael Fassbender. Yes, I know, everyone hates the movie. And I mean, I have it on very good authority and I trust those opinions, so I'm not going to be watching the movie. But the book itself was really good. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was a very clever story. It leans just slightly into like the horror genre. It's a little bit like borderline too graphic for me, but like I got through it because there was very little of it. It was just quite intense when we actually got to the graphicness of it. But the story itself, when you get to the solution, the story itself, it's so good. It's an intelligent story, I think. I really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the fact that there were so many times you thought you had the picture straight, only to realize there's like 100 pages left and you're like, there's no way that this is solved at this point. And then you get another piece and then another piece and then you get another picture and then you have to turn it on its head. And the pacing of these books is so good. In this book in particular, when you got to like the last 50 pages, I couldn't read fast enough. I was almost skimming because I needed to know what was going to happen. I needed to know the story. This was amazing. It was really, really good. And I totally get why it's so popular. Personally, I think I liked Redbreast just a little bit more, but that's not to say that this wasn't good. This was excellent. Really, really good. Again, if you want to hear any more of my thoughts on these 3 books in particular, there's a vlog entirely dedicated to these 3 books. I'll link it, so if you are interested, go check it out. Needless to say, I will be reading a lot more by Jo Nesbø in the future. I thought his writing is excellent, his stories are exceptional, and I really, really enjoy Harry as a character. So huge fan of Jo Nesbø at this point. All 3 of these were just really, really good. I thoroughly enjoyed my time reading them, and you can bet your bottom dollar that I will be reading more this year from Jo Nesbø. I have to read more. These were so good. So good. Then I read a book that I don't have the physical copy of. It is a self-published work. It's self-published in the States, and so to get a physical copy, the shipping it's a pain. So one day I'll have a physical copy, but I don't right now. It's called Bones. It's by K L Speer. I discovered this book on Instagram. This is her debut novel. It's the first book in a planned 3-part series, and it's kind of sold to you as a post-apocalyptic dystopian romantasy adult novel with a list of trigger warnings as long as my arm. So if you are intrigued by this book, by this story, but you have triggers, then please check that list, because there's a lot that goes on in this book. It was intense. It was very intense, to put it lightly. It's been a while since I've read a book like this. In fact, I can't remember ever having read a book like this. This is the kind of book that enjoys torturing you. It deals with so many themes and elements that just punch you. Like I said, there's a very, very long trigger warning list, and it's there for a reason. So like that might give you an idea of where we're at. I was in pain reading a large chunk of it. I was in a lot of pain. The fantasy element is very, very light. I wouldn't really label it fantasy, I think. At least not yet. Maybe there's more of it to come in the next books, but as of right now, it's like a piece of the story. It's not what makes up like the world or anything. It's an element of the story, if that makes sense. What I will say, maybe my favorite thing about this story is the found family element. I love found family as a trope. I cannot get enough of it. I gobble it up. I love found family as a trope, and this book has a solid found family. Some of the characters definitely need more depth, and the book could have done with some more world building, but considering that it's the first book in a 3-part series, I don't see why those things can't come in the next book. In fact, it would make a lot of sense for those kinds of things to be coming in the next book. So I'm really, really looking forward to where the story goes. It's not perfect, but I really enjoyed what was there, and I see a lot of potential for the rest of the story, and I'm very, very intrigued by what's going to be coming in the next books. I cannot wait to read the sequel. I need it. I need it yesterday. So yeah, it's a good book. I think it's a very good book. It's a solid debut, especially considering that it's self-published. I love the characters. It's a very intense story, but if you can handle the stuff that this book deals with, it's not perfect, but very few books are. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what we have in store in the next book, which I will be reading as soon as it comes out because I am desperate at this point. And again, big warning with this one. Please check out the trigger warning list if you are interested in this book. Just please do. And the last book that I've read up until this point, the 10th book that I've read so far this year, The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is the 3rd book in the Lord of the Rings series, and I finally finished it. I finally finished The Lord of the Rings. And I had such a good time. I mean, what is there to say? It's a fantastic story, and it's a great book. I'm one of these people that really vibe with Tolkien's writing. I know his writing is not for everyone. It's very descriptive. It's very, not whimsical, but like it's very flowery. It's very flowery. I mean, you know the story of The Lord of the Rings. The writing just kind of like, it's part of it. It fits right in the world, you know, that we're reading about. So I get why the writing is not everyone's cup of tea. It definitely is mine. I thoroughly enjoy Tolkien's writing. Yes, it gets a little long-winded sometimes. It does get a little bit too descriptive sometimes, but at the same time, no one had built a world like he had at that point, and I just thoroughly appreciate the amount of detail that was, and how vivid this world is. I just really appreciate his writing, and I already loved Lord of the Rings as a story, but reading the books have just thrown me into it all the way in the deep end. I am hooked. I am so invested in this world. I love these characters. I love the writing. I love the story and the world. I just really vibe with Tolkien, it seems. Huge fan. And I'm so glad that I have more of his stuff on my shelves that I can get into throughout the year, because I already miss this. I already miss it. It's funny because I think the movies are very true to the source material, but at the same time, reading the story, I mean, I've seen the movies for as long as I can remember. I've known the story for as long as I can remember, but for some reason or somehow the story felt new and fresh when I was reading it, even though, I mean, you can tell that they went to great lengths to make sure that the movie stayed true to the books. It still somehow felt really fresh, and I just fell into it all the more. And now I just kind of want to reread the whole series. I really enjoy these books. I think they're great. And I'm so glad that Tolkien went through all the effort of creating and writing down this world to share with the rest of us, because, oh my God, when you like sit and reflect about the fact that one person sat and came up with all of this, I mean, it's already kind of mind-blowing, but like when you really sit down and just kind of think on it, it's just, I mean, I could never have come up with this with nothing else to go on. Are you kidding? No, I could never. So just thoroughly impressed, really had such a great time with the Lord of the Rings series, reading it for the first time. I'm really sad it's over, but really glad that I have more of Tolkien's stuff on my shelves to get into. It was a really good time, and I'm really glad that I've finally gotten to this one, finally read it, finally finished it, and just thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm so glad that I enjoyed these books. So these are the books that I've read so far this year, 10 books, which is very nice, especially considering, or like, I'm only going to be comparing to how I read last year. There's no point in comparing me to like any other booktubers because there's just no point. But I can compare myself to last year me. And last year me was like at 2 books. So pacing for a really good reading year. I'm really hoping that I don't end up in like a 4-month slump in like April, because that would really suck. But at the moment, it really seems like I'm beating the slumps. I'm finally out of them. They're giving me a break, I hope. And the fact that I've enjoyed all of these, that all of them have been good books, good reading experiences for me, I mean, how lucky am I? So, you are now familiar with all the books that I've read so far this year. And just a little bit about them. Again, some of these books are featured in vlogs. And if you are interested in hearing more of my thoughts on those particular books, then go and check those videos out. As always, if you have thoughts or opinions on any of the books that I've mentioned, then feel free to share those in the comments and we can chat there. If you want to know more about my own thoughts or opinions on some of the books that I've mentioned that don't have their own vlogs, then feel free to ask questions and all that stuff. As always, I'll see you in the comments, so just have at it. But yeah, that's all from me this time around. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a really lovely day, and I hope that the book you're reading is a really good one. Bye!